The year is 1942. Across the shadowy streets of Lyon, posters appear like whispers in the night. A woman's face stares back from rough sketches, sharp features, shoulder-length hair, eyes that seem to hold secrets the Third Reich desperately wants to uncover. They call her the Limping Lady. But who was she? And why did an entire empire fear a woman with a wooden leg more than armies, more than bombs, more than the Allied forces themselves? What they discovered would change everything they thought they knew about the quiet American who walked with a slight limp through the streets of occupied France. Don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe. You are not here by accident. Virginia Hall should have married rich, should have lived quietly in Baltimore, hosting dinner parties and managing servants. Should have followed the path carved out for every well-bred woman of 1924. Instead, she declared something that would echo through history. I must have my liberty. Her mother Barbara was reportedly a social climber in Baltimore society who had married well and expected her daughter to do the same. But Virginia possessed something her mother couldn't quite understand, a hunger for the world beyond their comfortable walls. At a time when only 6 of the State Department's 1,500 Foreign Service officers were women, Virginia set her sights on diplomacy. While other young women dreamed of suitable marriages, Virginia dreamed of languages, of distant countries, of a life that would matter on the world stage. Cambridge didn't hold her. Neither did Barnard College. By 1926, she was in Paris, drawn to the epicenter of everything exciting, everything dangerous, everything her mother had warned her against. Her academic performance was merely average, but her real education was happening outside lecture halls. She was learning the rhythms of European politics, understanding the subtle tensions that would soon explode into global conflict. Europe was changing. In Italy, Mussolini's shadow grew longer. In Germany, a failed artist with a strange mustache began drawing crowds. Virginia watched these movements with the keen eye of someone who understood that the world was tilting towards something terrible. She moved to Vienna in 1927 to study languages, economics, and the press. Here she witnessed firsthand the rise of movements that opposed everything she believed about human equality and dignity. She also fell in love with a young Polish army officer named Emil, though her parents refused to bless the relationship. These early experiences shaped Virginia's understanding of power, politics, and the fragility of democratic institutions. She was learning lessons that would prove invaluable in the underground war to come. Yet none of this prepared her for what happened in Turkey. December 8, 1933. A hunting trip that should have been routine. Virginia scrambled over a wire fence in the wetlands of Turkey, her prized 12-gauge shotgun, a gift from her beloved father, clutched in her hands. The safety wasn't engaged. One moment of carelessness, one trip, one desperate grab for a falling weapon. The shell fired directly into her foot. What followed was worse than the accident itself. For 3 weeks, Virginia seemed to recover well. The initial treatment appeared successful. Then infection crept through her body like poison, defying every medical intervention available in 1933 Turkey. Without antibiotics, which wouldn't become widely available for another decade, the choice became brutally simple: amputation or the grave. Christmas Day, 1933. While families across the world celebrated, surgeons removed Virginia's left leg below the knee. She woke to find her future fundamentally altered. She named her new wooden prosthetic Cuthbert, a touch of humor that would become characteristic of how Virginia faced adversity. The device was primitive by any standard, heavy, cumbersome, and painful. Every step reminded her of that moment in Turkey. Every step seemed to close doors that had once been open. But the physical challenges were only part of her ordeal. Sepsis set in, bringing Virginia within inches of her life. In her delirious state, she later claimed to have seen visions of her late father, Ned, urging her to continue fighting. Whether vision or fever dream, something gave Virginia the strength to survive when medical professionals had given up hope. The recovery process was grueling. Learning to walk again, adapting to a world designed for people with 2 functional legs, accepting that her diplomatic ambitions might be permanently derailed. How could a woman with a wooden leg become a diplomat? How could she travel the world, serve her country, live the life she'd envisioned? These questions tormented Virginia as she struggled to rebuild her identity around this new reality. But what Virginia didn't know was that this apparent ending was actually a beginning. Her disability would become her greatest asset in ways she couldn't imagine. September 1st, 1939. German forces crossed into Poland. The world held its breath. Virginia was in Estonia, frustrated after 7 years of faithful service to the American State Department. 7 years of being passed over, rejected, relegated to administrative roles. Her disability had become a convenient excuse for those who couldn't see past a wooden leg to the brilliant mind it supported. She resigned. But instead of returning home, Virginia did something unexpected. She traveled to London, then to Paris, where she enrolled as a military ambulance driver. If her own government wouldn't have her, perhaps she could serve the cause of freedom in other ways. For months, she drove wounded soldiers 200 miles from the front lines to Paris, often under direct bombardment. Her wooden leg made operating the clutch difficult, but she adapted. She always adapted. Then France fell. In just 6 weeks, the seemingly invincible French army collapsed. Paris was abandoned. The country split into zones, occupied and free, though freedom was an illusion when your puppet master wore a uniform decorated with eagles and twisted crosses. Virginia found herself retreating with the French army, watching a nation she'd grown to love disappear under the weight of occupation. But in a small Spanish train station, chance intervened. George Bellows looked like any other traveling salesman. He talked about routes to London, about passages and papers, but something in his questions suggested deeper currents. When Virginia described the situation in France, her work as an ambulance driver, her passion for the country now under occupation, Bellows made a decision that would reshape the war itself. He gave her a phone number. The number belonged to Nicholas Boddington, head of F section for the British Special Operations Executive. The SOE, Churchill's secret army, designed to set Europe ablaze through sabotage, subversion, and the kind of warfare gentlemen weren't supposed to wage. Virginia almost forgot about the number, almost let it disappear into her coat pocket, another piece of paper from another chance encounter. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 64 Baker Street, the heart of Britain's shadow war. When Virginia finally made that call, Boddington recognized something others had missed. Her disability, her American passport, her intimate knowledge of France. These weren't limitations. They were assets. Code name, Geologist 5. Her mission, establish a resistance network in occupied France that could support the eventual Allied counteroffensive. Her cover, foreign correspondent for the New York Post. The training was brief but intensive. Virginia learned the art of silencing sentries without sound. She mastered codes that could turn innocent newspaper articles into vital intelligence reports. Poison capsules were sewn into her clothing, a final option if capture became inevitable. But there was something unique about Virginia's training that the SOE had never encountered before. While other agents worried about maintaining their cover identities, Virginia had to learn to use her disability as both weapon and shield. A woman with a wooden leg would be remembered, yes, but she would also be underestimated. August 23, 1941. Virginia crossed into Vichy, France, carrying nothing but her wits, her cover story, and a wooden leg that would soon become legendary among both allies and enemies. She was the first female SOE agent to take up residence in France, arriving when the country was still reeling from its rapid defeat. Her articles for the New York Post weren't just cover. They were masterpieces of double meaning, carrying vital intelligence back to London through seemingly innocent journalism. Her communication method was ingenious. Virginia's encoded communications were sent via Western Union telegram to her cutout at the New York Post, who forwarded the information to SOE London. But building a resistance network proved harder than anyone had imagined. Lyon, France's third largest city, sitting strategically near the Swiss border, a place where refugees crowded the streets, food was rationed, and finding a room meant accepting whatever was available, even a convent. The nunnery became the SOE's first reliable safe house, perhaps the only time in history that prayers and espionage shared the same roof so harmoniously. The nuns, whether they fully understood their guests' activities or not, provided sanctuary that proved invaluable to the resistance. Virginia soon moved to the Grand Nouvelle Hotel in the city center. From this base, she began the delicate work of recruitment. Every conversation was a gamble. Denunciations were commonplace. Trust was a luxury that could get you eliminated. But slowly, carefully, Virginia built her network. Dr. Jean Rousse, a gynecologist who provided safe houses and medical care. But Rousse's most ingenious contribution was establishing what appeared to be an asylum for the mentally ill. In reality, a sophisticated hiding place for escapees until safe passage from France could be arranged. Joe Monguer, a brothel owner whose establishment became an unlikely center of resistance operations. His workers spread more than just venereal diseases among German soldiers. They gathered intelligence, encouraged heroin addiction among occupying forces, and created a network of compromised enemy personnel. George Whittinghill, the American vice consul, who smuggled messages through diplomatic bags. The Heckler network Virginia created eventually comprised 90 agents spread across southern France. They provided intelligence on ammunition dumps, fuel depots, German troop movements, and industrial production. Each piece of information was a small victory, each agent a risk that could bring down the entire operation. But Lyon harbored a particularly dangerous enemy, Klaus Barbie, the SS operative and head of the Gestapo in Lyon. Known later as the Butcher of Lyon, Barbie was methodical, ruthless, and increasingly obsessed with the woman his network knew only as the Limping Lady. What made Barbie particularly dangerous wasn't just his brutality, it was his patience. He understood that networks could be unraveled thread by thread, that every captured agent could lead to 10 more, that the Limping Lady's greatest strength was also her greatest vulnerability. Each recruitment was a masterpiece of psychology. Each agent added another strand to the web Virginia was weaving across occupied France. But webs, no matter how carefully constructed, can be torn apart by a single wrong move. October 1941. The SOE had parachuted dozens of agents and wireless operators into France. Communications were improving. The resistance was growing. Then Christopher, a wireless operator, made a decision that would haunt the SOE for years. In complete violation of security protocols, he invited all known SOE agents in southern France to meet at a safe house in Marseille, the Villa de Bois. What Christopher didn't know was that the villa had already been compromised. The Vichy police were waiting. Virginia sensed something wrong. Call it intuition, call it tradecraft, call it the survival instinct that had kept her alive this long. She declined the invitation. The others weren't as cautious. One by one, they walked into the trap. Approximately a dozen operatives and wireless operators were arrested. The SOE's network in France was obliterated overnight. Virginia Hall was suddenly one of the few agents still at large, and the only one with the ability to communicate with London. The loneliness must have been overwhelming, but Virginia had work to do. The captured agents became known as the Clan Cameron. They were held initially at the impenetrable Périgueux prison, facing torture and likely execution. But Virginia had built her network for precisely this kind of crisis. Through her contacts, she learned the prisoners were being transferred to Mauzac internment camp. Less fortified than the prison, but still surrounded by barbed wire and watchtowers. The plan that emerged was audacious even by SOE standards. Gabby Bloch, whose husband was among the captured, became Virginia's operational arm. 3 times a week, Gabby traveled 35 miles to visit the camp, using her time to befriend guards at the local hotel bar. José Sevilla, a guard sympathetic to their cause, became the inside man. Virginia coordinated from a distance, providing supplies, forged papers, money, and the detailed planning that would make the impossible merely improbable. Her resources seemed limitless. Funds appeared when needed. Documents materialized as if from thin air, and safe houses opened their doors on command. Inside the camp, the prisoners played games of bowls, using their recreational time to map guard movements, identify blind spots, and measure distances to the fence. What appeared to be innocent recreation was actually sophisticated reconnaissance. The escape supplies Virginia arranged were masterworks of concealment. A jar of jam concealed a small file beneath its contents. Fresh laundry hid wire cutters between layers of fabric. Hollowed-out books contained screwdrivers and hammers. Tins of sardines were repurposed, their metal forming tools and blades, their contents providing sustenance. George managed to fashion a key to their barracks door using metal from sardine tins and bread as a mold. While he hammered and chiseled, the other inmates sang choruses as loudly as possible to mask the noise. But the first key failed. Racing against time and the new moon period when nights were darkest, the prisoners hastily engineered a replacement. Meanwhile, Virginia's network arranged getaway drivers, safe houses, train tickets, forged papers, and routes through the Pyrenees into Spain. The escape would require precision timing, inside help, and more luck than any reasonable person would expect. July 15, 1942. 3 a.m. José Sevilla climbed the watchtower himself, lighting his pipe to signal the all clear. The guard who was supposed to give the signal had failed to show. One by one, the Clan Cameron slipped from their barracks, following a string guide they'd run to the perimeter fence. Each man signaled his progress, 1 tug for all clear, 3 short tugs for danger. They encountered a guard during the escape. Heart-stopping moment. But fortune favored them. He was one of the sympathetic ones, merely telling them to keep the noise down before continuing his rounds. 12 minutes. 12 men, all clear of the camp and into the night. Outside, their getaway driver waited as arranged. Safe houses stocked with supplies courtesy of Virginia's meticulous planning. False papers, train tickets, routes through the Pyrenees into Spain. The camp guards discovered the escape at daybreak. The manhunt that followed was brutal, but Virginia had prepared for this too. Her network spread rumors that the escapees had been picked up by Royal Air Force bombers and were no longer in France. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, the hunt was called off. All 12 men eventually made it back to London by August 11, 1942, exactly as Virginia had promised. The official SOE historian would later call it one of the war's most useful operations of the kind. But the escape came with consequences Virginia hadn't anticipated. The German High Command was already frustrated by growing resistance in the French Free Zone. The Mauzac prison break became the final straw that prompted severe countermeasures. More importantly, the success had made Virginia herself a priority target. Klaus Barbie and his Gestapo team intensified their hunt for the Limping Lady. They knew she was the mastermind, knew she was still operational, knew she was more dangerous than entire battalions of conventional soldiers. But success brought its own dangers. Some weeks before the Mauzac escape, a young priest approached Virginia through Dr. Roos. Heavy German accent, but his story was convincing. French patriot from the Alsace region, father eliminated by the regime, seeking revenge. His name was Robert Alish. His piercing blue eyes seemed sincere. Virginia was skeptical, but allowed him limited access to her network. Sometimes the best intelligence comes from unexpected sources. What she didn't know was that Robert Alish was Agent Axel, an Abwehr operative who had successfully infiltrated her organization. Agent Axel never managed to pinpoint Virginia's exact location, but the damage he inflicted was immense. Secondary agents were compromised. Resistance members were arrested. When the Allies attempted to land at Dieppe in August 1942, they met unexpected strong resistance. Agent Axel had tipped off the Abwehr about Allied intentions. 4,000 soldiers were captured, wounded, or lost. The betrayal cut deep, but Virginia had learned long ago that in this business, trust was a luxury few could afford. November 1942. The tide of war was turning. British forces liberated Libya and Egypt. American forces landed in North Africa as part of Operation Torch. Axis forces were being pushed back on multiple fronts. In response, the German leadership ordered the immediate occupation of Corsica and southern France. The fiction of Vichy independence was ending. Virginia's network of informers warned her just in time. She gathered her documents and money and caught the last train out of Lyon, just 3 days before the Wehrmacht marched in. The train took her to Perpignan, 20 miles from the Spanish border. The Pyrenees mountains stretched ahead, 50 miles of treacherous terrain that she would have to cross on foot, with a wooden leg, in winter conditions. The guide she hired was notorious for abandoning clients who couldn't keep pace. Professional smugglers had a simple philosophy: the strong survived, the weak were left behind. They had seen too many people die in those mountains to risk their own lives for strangers. Virginia knew this. She also knew she had no choice. The journey that would have been difficult for anyone became an ordeal of endurance that tested every limit of human determination. Heavy snow made each step treacherous. The wooden prosthetic, designed for drawing rooms and city streets, became a torture device in mountain conditions. Her prosthetic rubbed her stump until it bled profusely, leaving traces in the snow that could have led pursuers directly to her. Every step was agony. Every mile was a victory measured in pain and willpower. She maintained radio contact with London during the crossing, mentioning that Cuthbert was being tiresome, but that she could cope. The radio operator, not understanding that she referred to her prosthetic leg, responded that she should have him eliminated. Even in her darkest moments, Virginia maintained her sense of humor. What the radio operator didn't know was that Virginia was living through one of the most grueling escapes of the entire war. Modern marathon runners who have attempted portions of her route describe it as exhausting under ideal conditions. Virginia completed it in winter with a disability while being hunted by the Gestapo. 3 days later, she descended the mountain range and arrived safely at a Spanish border town. She was promptly arrested by Franco's police for illegal border crossing, but the American embassy secured her release. Even in neutral Spain, Virginia Hall's reputation preceded her. The SOE leadership refused to send Virginia back to France. Her notoriety made her too recognizable, too dangerous. They gave her a desk job in Spain, hardly fitting work for someone who had just orchestrated one of the war's most successful prison breaks. But in 1943, the Americans established their own version of the SOE, the Office of Strategic Services. OSS Chief William Donovan knew exactly who he wanted for his clandestine operations in France. He had heard the legends, read the reports, and understood that Virginia Hall was irreplaceable. March 21st, 1944. Virginia returned to France via American gunboat, disguised as an old peasant woman. Makeup aged her face. Simple clothes hid her true identity. Even her walk was different. She had learned to disguise the distinctive gait that had made her famous. But the Limping Lady was back, and this time she had broader authority and better resources. Between March and July 1944, Virginia proved that her first mission hadn't been luck. She supplied arms to resistance groups, organized sabotage attacks that disrupted German supply lines, and played a vital role in assisting the Maquis, the rural guerrilla bands who had fled forced conscription into German labor. The Maquisards initially resisted accepting orders from an American woman with a wooden leg. Rural French fighters had their own ideas about leadership and weren't impressed by credentials from London or Washington. Virginia won them over through demonstration rather than declaration. When supply drops were needed, she arranged them. When German patrols threatened their camps, her intelligence network provided advance warning. When wounded fighters needed medical attention, her contacts delivered trained personnel. Under her command, 3 battalions significantly hampered German defensive preparations against the Allied invasion. Her network now operated with military precision. What had once been improvised heroism became systematized warfare. The numbers tell the story. In 8 weeks, she transmitted 37 intelligence reports, supervised 27 parachute drops of essential supplies, and organized 1,500 resistance fighters. Her operations led to over 170 German casualties and the capture of 800 others. Virginia had sent 37 messages from occupied France while serving with the OSS, each transmission representing incredible personal risk. Radio detection equipment was sophisticated by 1944, and the Germans had become expert at triangulating transmission sources. But Virginia had learned from her earlier experiences. She never transmitted from the same location twice. Her messages were brief, coded, and strategically timed to avoid detection patterns the Germans might recognize. The woman they had dismissed, rejected, and underestimated had become one of the most effective operatives in the European theater. She had proven that physical disability was no barrier to extraordinary achievement, that gender was irrelevant to strategic thinking, and that determination could overcome almost any obstacle. Virginia's second mission to France revealed the true extent of her operational genius. Working with the OSS under the codename Diane, she carried forged papers identifying her as Marcelle Montagne, an elderly peasant woman whose appearance had been dramatically altered through makeup and posture training. Her family had known her as Dindy, but now she operated under a constellation of identities: Marie, Philomène, Brigitte Lecontre, Anna Müller. Each name came with a complete persona, backstory, and physical transformation that could be assumed at a moment's notice. The woman who had once been rejected by the State Department for her disability was now demonstrating skills that professional actors would envy. She could become anyone, disappear into any crowd, blend into any situation. Working in the mountainous regions of central France, Virginia faced different challenges than her urban lion operations. The Maquis, rural resistance fighters who lived in the forests and hills, were suspicious of outsiders, especially women, and particularly American women with wooden legs. Virginia won them over through demonstration rather than discussion. When they needed arms, she arranged airdrops. When they needed intelligence, her network delivered. When they needed medical supplies, resources appeared as if summoned from thin air. Under her coordination, the Maquis became a formidable fighting force. They sabotaged railway lines carrying German supplies, ambushed convoys, and provided vital intelligence about enemy movements. What had begun as scattered bands of draft evaders became an organized military unit. The scale of Virginia's second mission was staggering. She transmitted intelligence reports while constantly moving to avoid German radio detection equipment. Each transmission location was used only once. Each message was brief, coded, and strategically timed. Her network arranged parachute drops with precision that impressed even experienced pilots. Supplies appeared exactly where promised, when promised, despite weather conditions and enemy patrols that would have deterred conventional operations. By summer 1944, Virginia commanded 3 battalions, approximately 1,500 fighters who looked to an American woman with a wooden leg for strategic guidance. The transformation was complete. The Limping Lady had become a military commander. September 1945. General William Joseph Donovan awarded Virginia Hall the Distinguished Service Cross, the only civilian woman to receive this honor during World War II. True to form, Virginia declined the public ceremony President Harry Truman wanted to hold. She was still in active service and feared publicity might compromise future operations. The president had wanted to honor her at a White House ceremony, but Virginia understood that shadows were her natural habitat. She also received the Order of the British Empire from Britain and the Croix de Guerre with Palm from France. But the accolades couldn't erase the discrimination that followed her throughout her career. After the war, Virginia joined the CIA as one of its founding members, where she continued to face obstacles because of both her gender and her disability. By today's standards, her treatment was absolutely unacceptable, but Virginia had learned to navigate institutional bias with the same skill she had applied to evading the Gestapo. Assigned to desk jobs, persistently passed over for promotion, she nevertheless continued serving her country. Modern CIA studies would later reveal that women were concentrated in lower grades than men, holding only 10% of senior intelligence positions, despite constituting nearly 40% of the professional workforce. In the 1950s, she returned to France to help establish resistance networks in case of Soviet attack, supporting efforts to combat the spread of communism in Western Europe. The woman who had once been the Gestapo's most wanted operative was now planning for entirely different kinds of underground warfare. Virginia finally retired from intelligence work in 1966, ending a career that had spanned 2 decades and multiple conflicts. She retired in 1966 and never spoke publicly about her wartime service. She married OSS Lieutenant Paul Guillot in 1957, a romantic relationship she had avoided during her most dangerous years, understanding that love could become a vulnerability in her line of work. Paul was 8 years younger and 6 inches shorter than Virginia, but their partnership proved enduring. The couple moved to a farm in Maryland, where Virginia lived quietly until her passing on July 8, 1982. She died in 1982 in Maryland, her story still confined to the intelligence community. Virginia never spoke much about her wartime service. This resulted in her slipping into relative obscurity, the fate of many who served in shadows. Only in the 21st century, after her passing, did public curiosity about Virginia's life story truly develop. But her legacy raises questions that echo through history. How many other brilliant minds were dismissed because of disability, gender, or unconventional backgrounds? How many potential heroes never got their chance because they didn't fit the expected mold? The State Department had rejected Virginia Hall multiple times, viewing her disability as disqualifying. Direct discrimination against women was still acceptable behavior when she began her career. The British SOE saw those same characteristics as assets. One organization's limitation became another's secret weapon. Klaus Barbie spent the war hunting a woman he considered the most dangerous Allied spy in France. After 1945, he escaped justice through the same kind of underground networks Virginia had mastered, eventually reaching Bolivia, where he lived under American protection for decades. The irony was bitter. The hunter found freedom through methods perfected by his prey. Virginia Hall proved that sometimes the most unlikely people become the most extraordinary agents of change. Sometimes a wooden leg isn't a limitation. It's just another tool in the arsenal of someone determined to secure not only her own liberty, but the freedom of millions around the world. The Germans gave her the nickname Artemis, and the Gestapo reportedly considered her the most dangerous of all Allied spies. She had earned that reputation through intelligence, determination, and an absolute refusal to accept the limitations others tried to impose. The Limping Lady had the last laugh after all. She outlived her enemies, outlasted their empire, and left behind a legacy that continues inspiring those who refuse to accept that disability, gender, or unconventional backgrounds should determine destiny. In the end, Virginia Hall got exactly what she had declared in her high school yearbook, her liberty. And in securing it, she helped secure liberty for countless others.